Thank you. So now you're all on Twitter. So I want to start with the elephant in the room. This was the elephant in the room I was planning to start with, but then because the slides are from yesterday, obviously huge things happened in one day of AI. So I want to start addressing another elephant in the room that the inventor, the godfather of AI, quit yesterday to make the statement that AI should be regulated. And I think that makes sense. I think this is an important thing to say. AI should be regulated to make sure that it's keeping us all safe. And now addressing the second elephant in the room, this is by now old news. This is from like 1.5 months ago. Academic paper from OpenAI that says that many of us might be soon automated out of parts of our jobs. So do you think next year we'll be meeting here also to talk about IT? Will be like robots walking around? This is a question that I'm getting asked sometimes, and I have a nice answer I want to share with you for that. Anybody knows what's this? This is a developer from, I think, 1950s, at the time that women were dominating computer science. She's doing punch cards. Since then, many things changed, but something that didn't change is punch cards did change, functions did not change. On the top left part of the screen, you see the function that this punch card represents. So functions did not change. If we write code, it will have probably things a lot more sophisticated than this, but this will also be something there. At the time, many decades ago, this is how it looked like. It, as you can imagine, took quite some time to build, to write, and so on. And since then, one of the things that has changed is job description. A software engineer or a computer scientist these days actually does not need to know assembly. Anybody knows assembly? I will change this question to, is anybody familiar with assembly, or anybody heard of assembly? Everybody heard of assembly? Cool. You're all like computer science people. Cool. I'm feeling comfortable now. Anybody knows how to write assembly or has written this in the last decade? I see 10 hands. Okay, people who did this, people who wrote assembly outside of university, for fun or at work, raise your hands. 1, 2? There's definitely 5 people in the crowd. But assembly is like the basics of computer science, right? We all write things on registers, we move them around. Why? What happened? How come is this not something that we need to know? Abstractions. Over the years, more programming languages were built on top of moving registers around in their content, and this was called computer programming languages, let's say. Right? There was C, then they came more things with more abstractions. Some languages like Go actually took down the abstractions, but my point is that computer science is about helping us. One of the things computer science is about is helping us do things simpler. So we need to know less how to do those things, but this is still a very required skill set. Although if a person from the 1950s, 60s will come to our day, they will probably not have a job in computer science. Did the machines took their jobs? Kind of, but we also found new people that are required to operate those machines. And this is what I think will happen with AI. It will be an abstraction layer on top of what we call today programming languages. Next generations will be looking at programming languages like we're looking at this. Something that 5 people in the audience do for fun. Speaking of fun, here's your assembly joke. It's always important to have memes. And so I would like to welcome you to the talk about AI-driven development, which actually with time, I thought that this makes a lot more sense as a name. This is AI-backed development, because we don't use AI to drive this, but we do use AI to use this. Right? This is not like TDD, test-driven development, that we write tests and write the code around them, but this is more like the tool. And I would like to invite you to watch the previous talks in the series. So this one is from GopherCon Denver, so that took place in Denver in 2021. This was the same talk, but 2 years ago, so you can imagine it's practically a different talk. Everything is different. There's not one thing other than the title that is the same. And another talk from 2020, even 1 year before, when this was also something that I found very interesting. But at the time, AI was not yet the buzzword, so I just used machine learning applications as a name. Let me introduce myself. My name is Natalie. This is my Twitter. If you want to find yourself clapping, this is where you can find it. But I bet the DevOps team will retweet this as well. If you follow me from the left bottom all the way up like this is my short journey, professional journey. So I studied in Israel in a university that's called the Technion. I finished computer engineering at the electrical engineering faculty. Many universities have EECS as one faculty, but this one goes way long back, and they have the almost rivalry between the two faculties. So I'm on EE team. Transistors, yay! As a student, I used to work at Intel, and I was in the team that was designing chips for computers, not the personal computers, but the huge server farms that, at the time, like Facebook and other huge clients were having. So it was 10-layered chips that you had to figure out how to do delays and decoupling and whatnot. And we were actually using a lot of software for this hardware. I bet today they're using a lot more AI for this. I moved to Berlin with the dream of working in something like NVIDIA. I did my graduation project in CUDA, which is NVIDIA's programming language. And I was like, wow, parallel is amazing. Everything is interesting. Yes, hardware. But then Berlin is a city of software. Not unfortunately, at the time it was unfortunately. So I started working at the first company that hired me. They asked me to do Go. I did not know Go, but I was happy to see that this is a very parallel focused language. So I enjoyed using that language, and I started quickly after running the Berlin Go meetup. I started doing it at the end of 2014, but the Go meetup in Berlin is actually one of the first ones in the world starting 2011, which is probably around 1 year after Go was released in general. Shortly after, I started also doing the Women Tech Makers meetup in Berlin, and then after 3 years of living there, I moved myself to Kenya. And together with a friend, we co-founded a company that was supposed to be sort of a Shopify, but for very basic Android version. So we wanted to reach the real, like the sellers on the street, the ones who have stands. It's called Duka in Swahili. And this was a very fascinating year. Plenty of failures, I learned a lot from them. And we ran out of bootstrap budget. We never managed to raise money, so I came back to Berlin. And then I worked as a remote engineer for a company called Grey Meta, based in LA. Before that, the previous company that I worked for in Berlin was sending me a lot to San Francisco, so I had a lot of chance to spend time in California in general. So by now, I had the chance to work with 4 different cultures. Israeli one, which is known to be kind of Mediterranean, you know, I feel a bit more comfortable here, let's say, than in Berlin. But then moving to Berlin, it was a bit more toned down. You had to have very different type of arguments, disagreements, and so on. Obviously, moving to Kenya was again a bit different. Working with American people, even north and south of California was already quite different between the two, but also different from what I have. And so every time going through this readjustment of understanding how to work with different cultures, arguably, I think for me, helped me understand better how to communicate with machines as well. It's just another style of conversation. So later on, I went to organize GopherCon Europe. This is started in 2018, and every year we're doing Go conferences in different countries in Europe. I became a GDE, Google Developer Expert for Go, and then I was working for a database company called Aerospike, which is, I still think, although I'm not there since 2020, I still think this is one of the Swiss Army knife companies. They're not very well known, they take a little bit time to set up, but the things you can do with it is amazing. I went on to organize B-Sides conference, which is a security conference. And then I became a developer ambassador for OpenAI, which is probably the most relevant thing for this conference. So this is something that I'm doing since the end of 2020. I am a volunteer, not an employee there. When GPT-3 became available, I happened to be one of the very first few people who signed up for the waitlist, so I also got a very early access. And at the time, the community was on Slack, and I was one of those people who would always answer questions. Hey, I recently got access, I'm trying to do this and that, can somebody help me? I was one of those people who jumped in and answered. At the end of 2020, they managed to OpenAI grouped 6 people to be the developer ambassadors. Basically, now we're officially helping people. Not much change, I never even got a hoodie, but I did started getting access to, to new people, to new technologies that were under NDA with the purpose of being able to help people further on once it's generally available and there's office hours. So now when you go to the website of OpenAI, you can go to the /ambassadors and you'll see a list of the 6 people, and one of them, there's Calendly link. You can always use it to book office hours with the different people. Later on, I became a host in the Go Time podcast. I started teaching DevOps at a local university in Berlin that's called HTW. And as of this year, I'm establishing my AI interest with a conference that is called Hey AI, about generative AI, and the SAI podcast, which I'm co-hosting with a friend who is a security researcher. We're focused on security and AI. The cross-section. So how do we hack AI? Sort of is the things we talk about. And this is what we will talk about today. We'll talk about the history of AI a little bit, we'll cover some important terminology, and then we'll dive into the tooling. As somebody who is an engineer, I like recommending specific tools, so have your camera handy in case you want to take a picture of some slide. There's lots of tools, lots of names. I'm not associated with anything, it's just things that I am personally using and enjoying. I try to have the most of them open source, some are not. Jumping to the history. So the AI seeds were planted by classical philosophers. This was discussed as something you can represent things as symbols and you can manipulate symbols, and this was what some people refer to as AI. In 1956, at the Dartmouth Summer Research Project, this is where the classical or modern day AI officially started. This was a summer research group where they discussed how to represent with computers these symbols. That led to a very blooming era that was called as the symbolic AI, and at the time there were lots of budgets, lots of university, lots of research, and the thought that AGI, artificial general intelligence, is around the corner. And unfortunately, in 20 years, they realized it's a bit more than they can do. Then came the first AI winter. Budgets were out, the research stopped, and for a while, nothing happened in this front until computers became strong again. This time, not as artificial general intelligence, but just as a specific artificial intelligence, so domain knowledge. These were the expert systems. So huge corporates like IBM and so on, they had machines which were very fancy, very impressive for the time, if-else blocks that would hold the entire knowledge base of the company, and you can have a conversation with it, which was close enough to artificial intelligence. Then came the second AI winter, because what happened eventually is that the personal computers became cheap enough to compete with these machines. These machines were not worth it anymore, and then we were just in the computers, but not AI computers era. And slowly the AI went back. It was strong enough and accessible enough for everybody to be able to do things like math and algebraic problems in their computers. And since the last 10 years or so, we are getting closer, maybe, hopefully, to the AGI and also to the big data era. Computers are very strong. Data is plenty out there. Companies collect, all the companies collect all the data about us, so there's a lot more to work with. And that is a short history of AI. Next, we are jumping to some terminology. So AI and generative AI, what's the difference between them? All sorts of definitions for AI, but basically once computers can present the ability to think more than they were defined in their if-else blocks. If you present to them new information or ask questions they were not asked or known before, if they're able to process this information and think like us, take decisions, this is AI. Generative AI is specifically AI that generates things, all sorts of media, images, text, music. It can generate code, it can generate other things. GPT, generative pre-trained transformer. What does it transform? Basically, it transforms vectors. It transforms data, like images, like text, into vectors, which is arrays of numbers. This is a paper released in 2017 by Google. Google was the first company to actually set the transformers out there. And 1 year after came the transformer architecture in this paper from OpenAI, and this was the first GPT. This paper is the base for GPT-1. And this is how the playground looks. From GPT-1, it was to GPT-3, it was 2 years, not that much actually, and also to GPT-4, and where we are today came another few years, so although you think of AI as a hockey stick, in the naming, it's actually tried to be a bit more toned down to keep this, let's say, less excited and less hype. Let's not just call GPT-5, GPT-6 as much as we can, but let's take this seriously, although the underlying changes are huge. What you see, who knows this UI? Who have seen this? Who has played with it? Half-ish. Third of the crowd. So when you get access to OpenAI and you are able to play with the GPTs out there, this is what you see. This is sort of a control panel, if you will. You change all sorts of parameters and you get different types of answers. What I do in my OpenAI office hours is hear what the people are trying to achieve and help them tune the different parameters. You can choose the model on the top left. You can choose the mode, if it's a completion, if it's a chat, if it's something else. Then you choose things like the temperature, frequencies, penalties, and so on. Lots of things to touch and tinker. And probably the biggest reason why GPT 3, 3.5, and 4 were popular, or let's say 3.5 and 4 were popular, is thanks to ChatGPT, whereas the UI, we actually don't need to do all that. You go into a website, you get to speak with a chat, and that's it. You don't have to move all those complicated things that you start, wait, which of the engines do I need, and so on. You just get a UI, and you're able to speak with it. Find.com, write down this website or take a picture. I'm not associated with them again, but I started using that a lot more than Google. This is basically based on GPT-4. You put in a query, like a very simple one, simple in the sense of your language. You don't need to put anything fancy, but same as you would ask ChatGPT, and it gives you a very good answer. It summarizes that, and you don't see in the screenshot, but it also gives you follow-up questions. So this is kind of the first one out of many GPT-4-based Google searches or engine searches. Then we said ChatGPT is the UI for all the different GPTs out there, which made one of the bigger changes and made AI a big thing in the newspapers and in the conversations with your grandparents. Then came plugins. Plugins, I think, did not take as much focus, attention as much as ChatGPT did, but I think this is a huge thing. What a plugin is when you go to the ChatGPT UI, you can also choose a mode if you go all the way up. I wonder if you can see here. No, the screenshot you don't see, but in the top of the ChatGPT, you can see that it says choose plugin, and then you activate several of them, and then you write your query, and if it finds something similar or relevant to your query in one of the activated plugins, it will translate your English query into an API call. Based on the documentation of those plugins, it will make the API call, it will get back an API call, and it will present to you. I think for us developers, this is probably one of the biggest new things of AI. I find this at least as exciting as Copilot, because how many of us have been given new API to use, and then you get 2 days to research that, figure out, play around, and then you start using it, you make the wrong API calls, you have to tinker. Here's the machine. It just gets the website where it finds, like the endpoint where it can find the API documentation, and then it continues from there. It's quite huge. On the business side of things, there's also quite a few implications of that, because already multiple people see this as a new app store. There's also LangChain, on which we will talk about a bit later, and this is sort of the Android open source app store. This is a bit more like the iOS one in the sense that this is a closed one. Then there is fine-tuning, custom data, and other LLMs. So GPTs, or the AI, is already at a place where you can put in your data, and companies want to understand how to use that internally, not necessarily using an existing model because they don't want to pay or because privacy reasons and so on. So I assume some of you heard of the llama and the alpaca. Basically, this is an LLM, so large language model. A GPT is a large language model. And what it does, it's a lot smaller. So it's not the sizes of GPT, which runs by the OpenAI team on machines that most of us will never be able to afford. This is something you can run on your local machine because it has been, or you can train it on a very specific small subset of data, something like tens of thousands of data points. This will be an expert in this specific domain. It will not perform as good as GPT in anything else, but in that specific thing that you gave it, it will be outstanding. It will be probably better than GPT-4 or ChatGPT. And it's very easy on resources in the sense that you need a very small training data set, and you also need a very lightweight machine. Like your average laptop is able to run those models. This is a very nice picture for those who like graphs, the evolution of LLMs, the large language models. And this is just 5 years. I find it pretty impressive. The last thing, no, a few more things to discuss, but the next one is the multimodal. In case you saw the GPT-4 announcement, you saw Greg Bockman take a piece of paper, write there, kind of draft a bit of a website. So you don't see this so well because it's a screenshot from YouTube. But it says, my funny website, it has some sections, and it has in the bottom this imprint you have to do. He takes a picture of it, he uploads, he waits 15, 20 seconds, and he gets this website. Several models worked here together. One was the visual model, one was the one that did the OCR, the translation from image to actual text. The one afterwards was the one that made a website out of this, so I would guess 3 models worked here together. In half a minute or so, it built the very basic thing. This functionality is not yet available by OpenAI. There are other models. Do I have another 10 minutes? That will, yeah. Other models have the same thing available. Next is AutoGPT and agents and AGI. So in case you haven't heard of it, basically AutoGPT and baby AGI is the representation of agents. Agents are a group of AIs that you give them a mission and then they are going and executing it. So right now, the first website that made this a publicly accessible website is this one. Cognosis. What you do is you just go here, write objective. One sentence, this is what I'm trying to do, and then it goes and executes this for you. What it will do is then go ahead, ping the different AI, so it's connected already to the internet. It will ping also GPT-4. It will build itself a list of tasks that it has to do. Then it will go ahead and execute that, and it will report as it goes, and then it will finish this. So this is an example objective that I gave it, just market research, some game app monetization tools, and then how it looks in progress. So it says, I am giving myself, on the left you see, on the right you see several tasks. This is task 1. I decided to give myself task 2. This is me executing on that. Then think about what will happen if you use this in your own internal company's database. You can connect this to your databases, you can connect this to your infrastructure tools, you can connect this to your CRMs. It will basically go ahead and help so many people do their job so much faster, so much easier. What this thing can do is just, when you do this, the most basic thing of connecting it A to the website, to the internet, and B to GPT-4. Then there is OpenAI and competitors. It's hard to do a proper map of this, but those are all the different companies that are doing all sorts of different things in this field. Now, a very quick browse of AI for developers, and let's start with what can it do for you. Jumping quickly. It can help you understand code, it can help you document that, and it can help you generate that, of course. It can also help you do faster POCs and integrate better into things, process different APIs that you have been exposed to, as we said, with the plugins, for example. It can also help project management because it can go work with Jira, Trello, and so on. And a very interesting thing, if you want to read more about that, I recommend taking a picture, is research that was done in Stanford less than a month ago. They gave 12 characters, each one a database, which is the memory of it, so sort of like a Sims, but with AI. So your personality is whatever is written in your database. Each one has an objective, like organize a party, be friends with person X, and so on, and then go ahead and operate. And after a day of the simulation, it did successfully become a little community. So do the same with all the different objectives of your different company employees, like the tech team, like the marketing team, like the biz dev team, and so on. Just see what ideas it can come up with. You don't need to let it operate, but at the very least, you can use that for things like inspiration. Then we're jumping to tooling. We have GPT, the different GPTs. So what you can do with them is basically help you understand code, help you write code. There was this big deal that Samsung got a little bit of security incident with that. Since then, things have changed, mainly because of Italy's request. Right now, you can opt out of ChatGPT to store any data, and the API is by default opted out from storing any data. Then you have all sorts of tools that are IDE-based, like Copilot, but there's also others. And then there is the LLM-based infrastructure, like asking LangChain or AutoGPT to do all sorts of things for your platform for you. Then there are vector databases. All the data that we use here is not stored as is. We humans cannot read that. This is all represented as vectors. Because this is a very specific way of representing the information, we do have the option of enjoying this specific narrowing down of the format. So vector databases are the new cool hit. This is an example from the Pinecone database. You can use it to do all sorts of things. In the website, there are some examples that will help you kickstart very easily. There's also many tools out there in development. You can find all sorts of charts like that. A quick plugin for my favorite programming language, Go. Why do I think that this will be the future compatible language, although this is not Python, which is a big deal in the field of AI. So some reasons is that this is consistent. This is not like curly brackets in the beginning or in the end, so the training data set, just like that, is already better. It's more efficient because you cannot have, it's more efficient in the white space. When you speak with the AI, you have to count tokens because the input is only this big. If you don't have dead imports, if you don't have necessary white spaces, which you don't with Go, this is already more efficient. It's a young enough language to have efficient, good coding practices there, so not things with security vulnerabilities and so on, and no deprecated versions. And this is also less library-oriented, so the code that it will be imagining for you is actually code and not just imports of things that don't exist. Some resources. Reddit. Yes, I'm telling you to use Reddit for work. There is the Midjourney subthread that you can always see how well AI is performing, right? Could you tell that this is a real picture? Look at the hands. 1 year ago, this is how AI generated hands. But this is now, right? It fixed that problem, and it will fix those big problems one by one. The ambassadors. I promised to give you a link of how to find office hours with the OpenAI ambassador. So the first one in this link is Bram. He is based in New York. Different ambassadors are located in different time zones, so you might end up speaking with me more than with any other who is based in the US, for example, but each one also has a different focus. Bram is a creative technologist, this one that you see here. So if you want to do something like using your eyes to scroll and then to move around and switch, like speech to text and so on, and build an apps based on that, he's your person. We have another one, Russ. He is a two-time exited with his company, I think, so he's going to help you with things like go-to-market. Another one is Vlad. He is very experienced with the education field and the art field. Me, APIs, talk to me rate limits, all the nerdy things that are infrastructure and backend thing. Find is a website that I recommended in the past, 10 minutes ago. I still think this is my go-to. I ran a Twitter survey recently asking who has been using this so much more recently. Obviously, most people, at least in my feed, still using Google, but I think I was 10, 15% or so were answering this. This is grabbing a surprising speed. And I think this is particularly good for coding things, because when you have a problem, you copy-paste that to Google. If you are lucky enough to get relevant results, that's great, but you probably get like 1, 2 links of Stack Overflow things, and that's it. If that didn't work, you're done. Here, you can keep the conversation going until it's solved. It's kind of like copy-pasting your errors into GPT-4, but you don't need access to GPT-4. Also, you can have a real conversation with that, in the sense that you can keep typing your questions, and also you will keep getting a proposed set of 3, 4 questions that you can click on. So this is also not just a great way of debugging things, but this is also a great way of learning about things. Like, okay, fine, I heard that this talk vector TB, that sounds really cool, teach me that. Go here and say, what do I need to know about vector TB? Just spend 15 minutes going with the flow. Click on the next question that it proposes until you understand. If you have something to ask in the middle, keep doing that as well. See how well you know that. Try to compare that with spending 15 minutes on Google. Newsletters. 1 million newsletters out there. This is one specific that I like, not a particular recommendation. 2 reasons that I like that. It's weekly, it's not daily. I feel daily is a bit intense for me. This is summarizing some of the noise out of this for me, but it also generates nice images while it does that. 3 Twitter accounts that I would very much recommend following are the ones from Andrei Koprety, who is one of the amazing brains these days in the field of AI. He's also working on a sort of Jarvis, a personal assistant inside OpenAI. Hardmaru, I don't know actually the real name of that person, but I find this thing to be almost as interesting as a whole feed. And then there's Andrew Ng, who is who used to be the person behind Google Brain in Google AI and Google Brain. In Google for a long time. He also co-founded Coursera, and he's the one who recently partnered with OpenAI to have a course on prompt engineering. This has been a lot of information, and I'm out of time, so I'm using the last 20 seconds for a recap. We talked about a brief history of AI, we talked about the terminology, and we talked a little bit about some specific tools that you can use. Thank you very much.